Cool. Super excited to be here. I work at Twitter. I've done a lot of work on experimentation. Essentially been in the thick of every experiment we've run for the last year. At the heart of like the tools we use to run experiments, our internal frameworks, everything experimentation. So what I wanted to talk about here today was a little bit about our culture around experimentation, why we do it, what sort of value we get out of it, and how we've learned to do it a lot better over the last year at a time when we've grown really rapidly. We've got over 1,000 engineers. A lot of people run experiments. It's difficult to scale engineering processes and continue to work effectively at that size. I'm going to start with a punchline. I think what I want you guys to take away from this is hopefully some inspiration on why you should run experiments if you're not already. And if you are, hopefully some ideas on things you can do to do better and get more out of it. I want to start out with a little bit of like macro context. Anybody disagree with this statement? Technology is wiping out companies faster than ever. Anybody, you disagree with it? Okay. Anybody agree with it? A few more people. All right. So I'd like to present that I think technology is leading to a really quick pace of innovation and quicker change than ever before. If you look at this chart, which is the amount of time a company stays on the S&P 500, it's dropping, and it's dropped significantly. 100 years ago, a company would stay on the S&P 500 for 75 years. So a big company that's successful would remain successful for at least 75 years, like incredibly successful. And it's dropped to about 15 years today, and it's continuing to drop. And people that study this sort of stuff think it's going to be about 5 years within a few years, which doesn't surprise me. It might surprise some of you. But I think that the reason this is happening is because it's become so easy to like build products, and you see so many great products coming out from all over the place. And the advantage that I think big companies had because of their size is becoming less of an advantage every day. And I think innovation is becoming more and more important. So companies that I think stop innovating tend to die or become a lot smaller very quickly. So this is essentially, I think, an important question for us at Twitter, and I think for everybody in the audience too. How are you innovating? There's a lot of ways to do it. I want to talk about how we think about it at Twitter and what I think we do well. So I'm going to talk about our approach to innovation at Twitter, some of the challenges at scale, how we scaled our systems and processes, what got better and what we learned, and some final takeaways, which again I think is all around why you guys should run more experiments and how to do it well. Our approach at Twitter. So we believe in innovation through experimentation. We believe in trying a lot of ideas. We believe in getting things out there quickly, not blocking people because somebody might disagree with whether or not something is worth trying. The way we do that is anybody can launch an experiment at Twitter. So a developer could go in on a weekend, write some code, build something, get it out to 1% of our users without any approval process, which I think is incredibly powerful. Unleashes creativity in a way that I had never seen before I came to Twitter. I worked at Microsoft before, so for me this was like crazy. Instead of going from like a 3-year ship cycle to a overnight ship cycle. It drives user insights at scale. When you're dealing with hundreds of millions of users, which we're fortunate to have, you may not be, but you too have more users than you can meet with face to face, right? When you're dealing with a lot of users, all of whom have different motivations, different contexts, different way of interacting with the product. A product like Twitter serves a number of use cases. It's very difficult to know whether a change is a net win or a net loss. And I don't think anybody can sit in a room and really like predict accurately. In fact, one of the things we've learned is it's very hard to know what might work or might not work. So we're usually very cautious about investing in like a massive project in and of itself. We'd rather do a series of experiments that help us prove or disprove a series of hypotheses that eventually contribute to like a bigger initiative. So this notion of driving user insights at scale is really important because it helps us get more things right over time. We launch hundreds of experiments every quarter. That's a lot of experiments, and it's very hard to like keep track of what you're doing well, what you're not doing well. It's very hard to keep getting better over time, and I'll talk about that a little bit. So you might say experimentation is the new black, right? And it sort of is. It's this thing everybody is talking about. There's a couple of quotes here that I really like. Experimentation is the new planning. Innovation means running experiments. Some of the best will look silly at first. More parties who can block experiments equals less innovation. So a bunch of stuff. Like I think everybody says, yes, this is great. And some of you may say, well, this is just a new thing. There's going to be another new thing in 6 weeks. But if you really think about it, it's also the old black. People have been experimenting for a long time. I think there's a case to be made that it's really the only proven way to succeed in a repeatable fashion again and again. So some of the quotes here are Thomas Edison, who says negative results are what he wants. They're just as valuable as positive results. I can never find the thing that works best until I try the things that don't. Even the Dalai Lama talks about it. So experimentation is awesome, and it always has been. So I think it's a great thing to really think about how you can incorporate it in your development practice. A common misconception is it's all about refinement. It's about optimizing your new user flow, for example. It's about getting something just right so you get the maximum leverage out of a certain user interface modal. And that is true. I think that's a good use of experimentation. But it's also a great tool to explore a problem space. Usually when you're working with a problem, there's a lot of ways to solve it. And it's really interesting to think about how you could try a bunch of different solutions and pick the winners based on real data at scale. So a great tool for both refinement and exploration. Here's an example. Which one of these do you guys think drives more clicks? Left? Right? How many of you think it's right? I don't know. See how this is a fairly easy one. How many think it's left? So half and half. So more people think it's the one on the left. It's actually the one on the right. It's really hard. How are you going to know, right? And it's a significant change, significant improvement. Here's another one on retention. This is a more complicated experiment. Massive redesign of the UI. Very hard to know which one drives more retention. Retention is probably the most important metric for Netflix, right? So let's talk about some challenges at scale. So when you have hundreds of experiments running every quarter, what are some things that are really hard? Visibility. It's really hard to know what the other person's working on. If you're working on something in the new user experience, somebody else is working on something in the new user experience, how do you make sure they don't collide? How do you make sure you're not being redundant? Learning. How do you get better with each experiment? With a lot of the things we do, we experiment a lot around increasing user feedback. And there's a lot of things that have been tried before, because we've been running experiments for years. And it's really important to build on an existing corpus of knowledge and build this learning loop so you're getting better with each experiment and you're getting better with each iteration. And when you're growing rapidly, that's really hard to do because you're onboarding tens of engineers every week or every month, and then people all want to try similar ideas. How do you sort of build this culture where everybody's getting smarter with every experiment, which I think is really important if you want to solve really hard problems. Collaboration. Another really simple thing, right? I think is the collaboration track. So we acknowledge how hard it is to collaborate effectively across design, comms, legal, engineering, product, different teams, platform, the guys doing ads, the guys doing growth. Really hard to do. How do you do this at scale when people are launching experiments over the weekend, right? Rigor. At the heart of good experimentation is a scientific method, right? It's not just willy-nilly, ship something, look at the metrics, pick what seems to work. It's a fairly rigorous process. The scientific method is about having a good hypothesis, having a clear sense of what you're trying to accomplish in terms of metrics. Shipping something that only changes a focused part of the product. You can't change everything at once and know what changed what. You got to be able to isolate changes. So there's a significant amount of rigor that needs to go into high quality experimentation so you can trust the metrics and the insights. That was another thing we were doing poorly. A lot of people would just started the company, ship an experiment. They wouldn't have really thought about what the hypothesis was, what the real metrics were they wanted to move. And then you spend months on it, and then you look at the data, and it's you can't really make any useful decision, right? You got to redo it. So that was a big source of waste for us internally. So how did we scale? Fairly simple stuff. We used a bunch of existing tools of the company. And I think the takeaway here is using tools well can be really powerful. It sounds really simple. Using tools well can be really powerful, right? Atlassian is this huge company built around the notion of high quality tools to drive productivity. So that's basically what we tried to do. We built a common JIRA workflow for collaboration. Here's how we we think about the experimentation lifecycle, it starts out with asking some good questions and asking better questions as you learn new things, building a clear, crisp hypothesis, making some predictions, and picking metrics, testing your predictions, analyzing results, and learning from it, right? And you want this loop to continue. You want people to learn with each iteration, and you want to disseminate learnings within the organization. So this is what it looked like in JIRA. Essentially, we created this board. We created a ticket type. So anybody has an idea, you open a ticket. It shows up under your team in the open column. Once the product manager has written like a little product brief or like some sort of like document just synthesizing what you're trying to do, you can move it into accepted. And we use like the ability to like not let a ticket move into accepted unless it has a product brief. And we try to make it really easy. You can just drag a ticket into the next lane. Once the engineer has written the code and shipped it to a certain percentage of users, you move the ticket into running. When you have enough data to perform a statistically significant analysis, you move it into analysis. So very, very straightforward. But I think this is like a great way to bring a little bit of order to what's otherwise chaos. Like this is a good way to manage chaos, for us at least. So the thing that's not intuitive here is the column called holdback. So a lot of our experiments are geared towards retention, which is to say we want users to come back to the product more. And the way you measure retention is you like run an experiment over an extended period of time. You have to be able to measure the impact of a new feature over a month or 2 months or 3 months to truly know if it improved retention or not. If you run an experiment for 2 weeks, it's sometimes hard to know if that same user kept coming back, the one that was in that bucket, in that control group, or not. So what we'll do is if we see strong, promising early results, we'll dial that experiment up to a majority of our users. So if there's like a new photo experience that's like doing really well, we'll dial it up to like 99% of users. And we'll hold it back from like 1% random users. So we continue to have like a control bucket that doesn't see that, so we can compare effects over like a month or two to truly know whether it's moving long-term retention or if it's just like a short-term novelty impact. So that's the life cycle. Here's sort of what the board looks like. I blurred some of it out. But there's a ton of experiments, lots of stuff going on all the time. So that was the first thing, like a simple workflow that we sort of made it really easy for everybody to use in JIRA. The second thing was knowledge management in Confluence. There was a time when people would just like write experiments, like put up their write-ups in random places. So we wanted to make it really easy, have a simple way for everybody to do this in a consistent way. So a very simple Confluence page is very easy for us to put together. There's a template. You go into the template. It asks you all of the things you want to think about while writing an experiment. You type it in and you hit save, and you're basically done. And you've thought about things rigorously enough to be able to go write some code. Here's some of the questions we think about. Within the experiment brief, before you run the experiment, we want to make sure people think about the problem, define the hypotheses, think through the design for the experiment. Once the experiment's been run and analyzed, describe the experiment and present the results, and offer takeaways. There's a lot of interpretation, but I think this is a fairly lightweight format. It's not like we're asking people to do a lot of work, but it brings the level of rigor we think we need to have to be successful. Once a team has done a write-up, it shows up over here, and the team sends an email to basically the whole company, so everybody sees what's happened. There's like a standing preview meeting that our analytics team runs. So teams that have run an experiment go present what they've learned at that meeting. People can talk about it. It's a very simple way to foster a lot of collaboration, and it's worked really well. I'll talk about some of the results in a minute. The last thing that we did was we found that people were doing a lot of experiments that really didn't like align with top-line goals of the company. As a company, we know there's 3 or 4 things we want to focus on, right? So how do you bring focus to like the most important things for the company without constraining creativity too much? So essentially what we wanted to do was rather than mandate focus on a few areas, we wanted to organize experiments into like a framework that you could look at and really know what's going on. So we built something we call the hypotheses tree. So the hypotheses tree is basically just like a view into all of the areas that are being experimented on. So some of the areas here are feedback, media and content, syntax and mechanics. So there's a core hypothesis that goes with each of these areas. For example, syntax and mechanics is if you simplify syntax and mechanics, more people understand Twitter, they're more likely to like stay on the product, they're more likely to engage, more likely to be retained. And within that, there's a number of sub-nodes of the tree that we attack. People can create sub-nodes. And within each of those nodes, there's a bunch of experiments. So if you want to work on syntax and mechanics, you could really quickly see who else is working on something related to @mentions, for example. And not do it because somebody's doing it, or do something simple, or wait till you've learned something from the thing that's already in flight, and so on and so forth. So what got better? A couple of things. We doubled completed experiments. So of all the experiments we were running, we doubled the ones that we felt we could say were completed correctly, and ones that we could actually like learn something from and like do something with. We reduced cycle time by up to 50%. So that basically means we were getting things done twice as fast, almost twice as fast. And I think we became a much better learning organization. Like just from like sitting in a lot of these like experiment review meetings and helping teams analyze experiments and run them, it was clear that we were running smarter experiments. Like even new engineers were able to like really like grok like the problem space a lot better than they were able to before, and really like attack some really like difficult problems as opposed to trying really, really simple things over and over again. So this is a really powerful one. And I think I would present that in the long term, a learning organization that experiments a lot, like a experimentation-focused learning organization, can be a sustainable recipe for success, like over a really long time. I don't have a lot of data because there's not a lot of people that have done this over 100 years, but I think it can work if done well. So final takeaways, experimentation drives innovation. Really think about how you experiment in your companies. Are you set up for success? If you're not doing it, how can you do more of it? And how can you do it well? Collaboration and learning is a big part of it. It's not just about shipping code. It really is about like the learning and the analysis and talking to others. And smart use of tools can make you up to 4 times more productive. It's crazy. When we started talking about how we could be a more effective culture of experimentation, we wanted to rebuild all of our tools. Like we wanted to like throw everything out and build everything again, create a team of like 10 or 20 people. And I was talking to the guy who actually suggested smarter use of tools, and I thought he was crazy. I thought we'd get like the most win through a better framework, like a more optimizedly like powerful model. But turns out we got more gains through just like simple things. So think about that as you guys like start to experiment more in your companies. That's about it. I think I have 2 minutes, so if there's questions, happy to take them.
As your team grows and gets bigger, how do you stop redundant experimentation happening with newcomers?
It's really hard to do, I think. So the question was, as your team gets bigger, how do you stop redundant experimentation from newcomers? I think more visibility. Like really, you want to have like a place where people can go see what's been tried before. It takes work because somebody has to go synthesize past learnings and summarize it. So we have an analytics team that helps us do that, and that helps. On the one hand, you don't want to create a bunch of like approval processes, right? Because you don't want like the new guy to be intimidated. But what you do want is to like make that information easily available so anybody can look at it. And I mean, we try to hire smart people, so we just want to make the information available to them and then let them figure it out. And if there's a redundant experiment, I think that's okay. Like you can't be perfect. We'd rather have some redundancy than sort of like curb creativity. You mentioned that anyone can start and run the experiment. Assuming these are developers, do you set aside a percentage of time for these experiments, or do these developers experiment full time? So they do this as part of their job. Twitter is a very bottom-up culture. So a lot of people will champion work they want to do, and I think the management chain is very open to letting people pick what they want to do. There are situations where a team is under the gun for like a big deliverable, in which case developers on that team may not have like the full freedom at that point in time. But most of these things, there's quite a bit of flexibility. And we do have something called hack week. So 2 weeks in a year, people can work on whatever they want. So that's a time when you could like just get together. It's sort of like Google's 20% time. You can get together with other people and work on whatever you want, or you can work on something on your own, or you can take a class. So I'd say the answer to that is a mix of both. What's your position on deploying an experiment to an internal audience before customers? Twitter is really geared towards shipping stuff externally. We don't have a great internal dog food environment, so we tend to bias towards just getting stuff out there to customers. Something we should maybe think about, but it's worked well. I think shipping stuff to a small audience is how we mitigate the risks. Risks there, you ship something to like 0.5% of users, you look at metrics, if something's broken, you roll it back, otherwise you dial it up. We do dog food as well, but not as much. And the thing with experiments is you want scale. To really know if something is working, you want statistically significant results. And internally, if you have like tens or hundreds of people using it, that's usually not enough of an audience at Twitter's scale. Are we on time? Keep going? OK. It looks like you have a single board for all experiments across the company. How do you balance some people's desire to see everything at once with an experimenter's need to stay focused? So JIRA lets you create all kinds of boards. So the board I showed was like a single board for the whole company, but teams can create their own boards. So I think JIRA is incredibly flexible. It lets people do whatever they want to do, this sort of thing. One more, last question. How do you pick the test group, the 1%? So this isn't something people pick themselves. It's just handled by the framework. You want to make sure it's like a random group of 1% users. There's a lot that needs to go into making sure the 1% sample isn't biased. So we have like a bucketing library that you just call, and the library sort of like buckets users into different experiments and manages who's in what experiment. So that's how we do it. It's essentially abstracted from the engineer building the experiment. All right, thanks everyone.